At first light, the bay is perfectly still. The water does not move, the trees do not move. Snow lies untouched along the shoreline, covering the last footprints of people who were here only weeks before. Doors hang open, nets are frozen in place, lamps remain where they were last set down. Nothing looks damaged, nothing looks hurried, and yet no one remains. The question is not why they left. The question is why they never came back. In the early years of the 20th century, Alaska was still being mapped in earnest. Coastal settlements rose quickly where the sea promised work and survival. One of those places sat quietly along the southern edge of the Kenai Peninsula, at the mouth of a narrow forested bay. It was first known as Port Chatham. Later, it would be called Portlock. To the outside world, there was nothing unusual about it. A cannery, a dock, modest homes, a small multi-ethnic population of native Alutiiq families and immigrant laborers drawn by fishing and timber. It was remote, but not isolated by Alaskan standards. Ships came and went, goods moved. Oh crazy, wages were paid. Children were born there. Winter in that region was harsh but expected. Darkness stretched for months, storms sealed the bay, snow made movement slow and deliberate. Communities planned for it, they always had. Portlock was no different, or so it appeared. What was considered normal then was endurance. If supplies ran low, people rationed. If storms trapped them, they waited. If someone disappeared into the forest, explanations were found. Alaska required that kind of thinking. But by the time the winter of 1949 arrived, something had already begun to change. People were no longer disappearing in ones, they were leaving in groups. The system that governed Portlock was informal but rigid. The cannery determined employment. Shipping schedules dictated food and income. Winter reduced the town to itself. There were no police, no standing medical staff, no easy escape once the snow came down. Deaths, when they occurred, were handled quietly. Accidents were common in fishing towns, so were illnesses. A man lost at sea was mourned and recorded. A hunter who did not return was assumed to have misjudged the weather. But in Portlock, the disappearances did not follow those patterns. Men vanished on land, experienced hunters, loggers, people who knew the terrain. Some bodies were found later, broken in ways that did not align with falls or animal attacks. Others were never found at all. No official investigation followed. No outside authority arrived. The explanation stayed local, passed from one resident to another, and eventually not spoken aloud at all. Routine continued. The cannery operated. Boats were repaired. Children went to school. But small changes became noticeable. People stopped walking alone. Certain trails were avoided. Conversations ended when outsiders approached. Fear did not announce itself. It settled in quietly. Individual lives began to fracture under that pressure. There was the hunter who went out one morning and did not return. His rifle, later discovered, snapped cleanly in two. There were women who refused to let their children leave the house after dusk, even during the long summer days. The Alutiiq elders spoke of something older than the town, not as a story meant to frighten, but as a warning they had already given once before. Some settlers listened. What is documented, however, is not folklore. It is the pattern. By the late 1940s, the population had dropped sharply. Homes were abandoned without sale. Boats were left to rot. The school closed, not because children had moved, but because there were too few left to teach. Winter accelerated everything. When the bay froze over, Portlock became unreachable except by air, and even that was unreliable. Those who remained were sealed in with whatever threat they believed surrounded them. And then, during one winter, the town simply ceased to function. There is no single date recorded for Portlock's end, no evacuation order, no disaster report. Instead, there is absence. When ships returned after the thaw, they found structures intact but empty. Food stores remained. Personal belongings were still inside homes. There was no evidence of struggle. No fire. No storm damage sufficient to explain a mass departure. The people had not fled in panic. They had left deliberately, and they had left everything behind. Some relocated to nearby villages. Others dispersed entirely. Few spoke publicly about why. Those who did offered fragmented accounts. Warnings ignored. Deaths dismissed, fear that had nowhere to go. No one returned to rebuild. For decades, Portlock existed only as a name on aging maps. Records were incomplete. Death certificates were vague. The cannery company dissolved. Responsibility evaporated with it. There was no formal inquiry into the town's disappearance, no consolidation of witness statements, no attempt to separate fact from fear. The land was reclaimed quickly. Forests swallowed foundations, snow collapsed roofs, trails vanished. What remained were questions that could not be answered because no one had written them down when it mattered. In the years that followed, Alaska continued to grow. New towns replaced old ones. Infrastructure improved. The wilderness remained unforgiving, but more predictable. Portlock was not commemorated. It was not studied. It was not preserved. It simply became a place people avoided. Today, the bay is quiet again. Only remnants remain. Rusted machinery, broken pilings, indentations where homes once stood. Nothing marks where children slept. Nothing lists the names of those who never came back. The official explanation is silence. The unofficial one is left to memory. And memory, like winter, erases slowly. The town did not burn. It did not flood. It did not collapse. It emptied. And whatever convinced an entire community to leave, in the middle of Alaska, after one winter, was powerful enough that no one ever tried to return.